I'm so excited. Okay, hopefully this works for everybody. So today we're moving from the Dark Ages, from those problems of the 14th century or the 1300s, and we're moving on to this period of time which is a rebirth or a renaissance. And I like to give you a number, a specific number of things to remember. For example, I will tell you there are 4 rebirths to the Renaissance, or I will tell you there are 5 characteristics of a new monarchy.
Pardon the interruption, but 11th graders with the last names that start with A through E who have not yet had their student photo taken, please go to the comments and enter FIC for picture makeup.
Yesterday I described to you how towns were coming back, and maybe how trade was being reestablished after the Dark Ages when really not much was going on, right? Where we had that manorial economy where the manor and everything was very quite local for the economy. Now we're starting to see a rebirth of the trade. In addition to that, we see a rebirth of classical texts. And by classical, I mean Greco-Roman texts. The rebirth of classical texts. And then also the rebirth of classical art forms. What do I mean by classical? Yeah, not just old, but Greek and Roman. So the way that the Greeks and the Romans did art, it's coming back. They're relearning how the Greeks and the Romans were doing art, and they want to copy that. They want to mimic that. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, is the rebirth of individual man. I will explain all of those things to you as we go along.
Mr. Barron?
Yes?
We don't see a presentation.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. What do I got to do here? I know. Thanks for telling me. On which one? How about now?
Yep.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being kind to me. Mr. Barron's so old. Good. So the Renaissance and the rebirths. You got your 4 rebirths there. Friends, you can go back and look at that later. Here's the rebirth of towns and trade. We looked for Waldo yesterday. We couldn't find him. You might know that he died of the plague. But we did see that towns come back. And remember that towns are very important for their markets. That's really the only reason that they exist is to have, it's not the only reason, but it's the most important reason that it is a town, is that it's a market. It's buying and selling things. There are things that are being bought and sold there. Spices, for some reason, seem to be really, really important at this point in time. Nowadays, you can go out and buy spices for $6 or $8, any place. Cinnamon and cloves and things like that. Really not a big deal. Pepper. But back then, there was this mania for them. People were willing to pay almost any price for spices, and they're being brought from far away. We'll talk more about spices later. Middlemen existed. You have these people who are purchasing spices from traders across the Mediterranean and bringing them into the boot of Italy and then taking them farther up north into northern Europe. These middlemen are making quite a bit of money from doing this. The valuable spices are being traded. There's a whole bunch of other products that are being traded too, quite frankly. Anything that you can think of, furs and pots and barrels and tools, just all sorts of things that are created in these towns that are being traded. People are making money. And as they start to make money, They want to protect that money from feudalism, right? We talked about this a little bit yesterday, how the town is a new political and social organization outside of feudalism with its three classes. We have that new class of people. What's the new class of people? What are they? Well, certainly they're organized in guilds. The bourgeoisie, right? Bourgeois people, middle class people, towns dwellers is what we have going on. A new kind of political and social organization. Because you have this new set of society, these new this new social class, and because you have a town that doesn't fit into feudalism, you need to create a new education in order to teach the people how to live in a town, how to be a business person, how to engage in trade, or how to rule a town. How does one live in a town? We maybe forgot that word over a long period of time. The word that means you reside in a place and you have certain rights in that place. We tend to use that word way too much outside of the towns. Those are people who live in the towns are town people. Yes, citizens. People also. But citizens, right? You have certain rights and obligations from living in a town. People didn't know about that. They had forgotten that. The Greeks knew about that. They lived in towns. The Romans knew about that. They lived in towns. These guys don't. You need a new kind of education to teach people how to be a businessman successfully and how to be a citizen successfully, or how to wield power. And in the end, then, a new mindset is created. A new kind of man. We'll talk about it as well. So towns and trade are creating all those sorts of things. This new education, like I said, is for businessmen and it's for leaders. It's not for what people used to be educated for all the time. People in the medieval period really only had one thing in mind: heaven and avoiding hell and pleasing God and doing what Jesus said, kind of. And that's theology. The study of religion was very important throughout the Middle Ages. People only thought about religion and studied religion. Those who could read and write were all about religion. And now we've got people who don't care that much about religion. They want to know what it's like to be a successful business person. They want to know what it's like to lead people in a town. How to deal with money. How to deal with the law. How to create laws. How to make people obey the law. What is it to wield power? How do you do that? They know people wield power when you're a king or you're the noble, and that's just a given, right? But this is, how do you, as a citizen of a town, how do you decide to affect the town? How do you decide to, maybe, well, think about it. What organization rules a town, even if we're talking about Edina nowadays? City council, right? A town council. And who's the head of the town council? The mayor. It's that same thing. For us, it's very normal. That's a completely new thing that they have to do. So the last people who knew how to deal with money and law and power and citizenship, of course, are the Romans. And if we go back a little bit farther than that, then the Greeks. And the Greeks stole a lot from the Romans. So Romans and Greeks, or as we like to say, what kind of civilization? Thank you very much, Pastor. So they want to look back to the Romans and the Greeks for a new education system, one that really doesn't have a lot to do with Christian religion. So they decide that, or they find that, the answer to those questions is in Greco-Roman texts. First Roman texts in Latin, but then in Greek texts as well. So there's this mania, there's this craze for finding texts that had not really disappeared, but had been untouched for hundreds of years. And the reason that these classical texts had been untouched is because they told the people how to, live in a town and how to be famous and how to be talented and how to be a Roman or a Greek and live like the Romans and the Greeks did. And that's not what people were into in the medieval period. They were into God and getting into heaven. So they're looking for Roman texts, and then eventually they're looking for Greek texts. And then two, the people of the Italian peninsula, this is where the Renaissance starts, when they walk outside of their building or their house, wherever they're living, they look around and they see kind of what you can see in Italy today. You go to Rome, you go to Florence, you can see a lot of Roman ruins. And you can be really impressed by those Roman ruins. You and I are impressed by them, but imagine the people from that time where they're like, there's been hundreds of years of the Dark Ages where nothing's really going on. They're not building giant aqueducts. They're not building auditoriums and huge buildings and so on, like the Greeks and the Romans did. Where in the world, how did they forget how to do that, they asked themselves. How is it that the people from hundreds of years ago knew how to build these fantastic structures and seemed to be really organized? So Italy is full of Roman ruins and texts. The texts are hanging out in monastic libraries for the most part. They're in Christian monasteries, but the monks didn't care about them. They never looked at them. Because why would they? Once again, they open it up and it's like, oh, I don't know, it's about some famous Roman general. We don't care about that. How do I get into heaven? Roll the scroll back up and put it away. Now these people are opening the scrolls and they're like, oh my God, this is awesome. It's about an old Roman general who did this great thing. I'm going to read it. Because that might tell me something about how to have power and wield power. Constantinople, too, is the capital of the old Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. I'm sorry I kind of skipped over that. But essentially, it continues to exist beyond where Rome fell and the Dark Ages started in Western Europe. We have this Eastern Roman Empire where things were going really pretty well for a long period of time. In fact, it continues to exist until 1453, when the Ottoman Turks finally take over the last stronghold, which is really just the city, the capital city of Constantinople. Right before the Ottoman Turks take over Constantinople, you can imagine that some people who had the means to do so fled Constantinople. They got in ships and they sailed across the Mediterranean to Italy or the Italian peninsula. And they brought with them a lot of Greek works. And they brought with them, obviously, the Greek language. And they arrived on the Italian peninsula and said to the people there, do you want to learn Greek? Do you want to read these Greek books that I brought with me? And sure enough, they did. The Greeks knew a lot of stuff about how to wield power and how to be good businessmen and how to do art. And so people were very interested in that. They were finding out things about civic consciousness. What does it mean to live in a town? What does it mean to be a citizen? How do you rule? What does it mean to rule? How do you do that? And, this is very important too, how to demonstrate human powers. That seems like a very normal thing to you and me, but we're modern people. We're not medieval. There's one person in here who's medieval. Bless them. But the rest of us are modern people. There's one person in here who's just so concerned with getting to heaven and avoiding hell and things like that. We'll go beyond that. You know we go. So how to demonstrate human powers. More about that in a second. Hey, you at home, how's the sound quality? You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you. You know I'm wearing a mask, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks. Really what I'm talking about is something called humanism. I love that word. I love it when a word sort of tells you what it's all about. It's about humans. Humanism. And you look at Greek and Latin texts in order to promote that sense of civics, that sense of actually individuality, an individual human, and how that human can exist sort of outside of just trying to get into heaven and avoid hell and please God. What they start to do is they look at what the Romans were learning and decided to copy that. Remember, they just, at this point in time, they have all this respect for the Romans now. And so they're looking at things like rhetoric, we'll talk about that in a second, and law, Roman law, and poetry, and history, and politics, and moral philosophy, and manners. The Romans did all of those things really quite well, and they want to learn from the Romans about how to do it in here and now. What's a better word for rhetoric? I've heard of rhetoric before, but sometimes I forget, like, what the heck is rhetoric? Speech, yeah. And it's speech with a purpose. It's speech to convince, usually. And isn't that a great power to have? To be able to speak to a group of people and convey meaning and to give a message and to convince people of something. Like today, you know what I'm trying to do rhetorically is try to convince you that there was a Renaissance and it was made up of 4 rebirths. How am I doing so far? You're believing it? Fantastic. Good. Okay. I'm doing it like I'm doing it well. Well, you know what law is. I don't know if we need to go through all these things. Why would you want to learn poetry? Why would you, what purpose does poetry have? You can tell, you might ask, I have like a disdain for poetry. Poems! I actually like poems. I'm going to be like that. I used to not like poems. When I was your age, I just didn't get them. And so, now I like poems. Do you like poems? What are poems? Why study a poem? Or why write a poem? Why learn a poem and be able to, in the middle of a party, say, shush everyone, I've got a poem. And then they turn the music off. Do it. And then you just, boom, you do the poem, and then everyone's speechless. Or, I don't know, maybe they just throw you out of the party. But it was about daffodils. No. What is poetry usually about? Emotions, yeah. In fact, it's like music. What's most music about? It's a 4-letter word. Oh, wait. Life is good. Love, right? Isn't poetry a lot about love, oftentimes? We're not reading the same poem. Well, it's about emotion. It's about how a human feels. And in the medieval period, nobody cared about how humans felt. Nobody cared. It was all about God. I've got to get to heaven. I've got to please God. I've got to do what God told me to do. And so for the most part, we've got, poetry. History is kind of the same thing. History is useful for learning from the past and then being able to do something in the here and now with it. You take the example of famous people, how so-and-so did such and such a thing. You're in a very similar situation. You do the exact same thing to win, or you avoid it if you have a bad example of something that you avoid doing that and repeating the errors of the past. Moral philosophy. I wonder if I'm going to be talking about all this in just a second. Moral philosophy is get ready to gasp, okay? Non-Christian morality. The people from this period of time can't possibly imagine that if you're not Christian, you could be moral. But the Greeks and Romans oftentimes were living, in pre-Christian times, and yet they kind of decided what was good and bad. So that's a new thing for a lot of people at this point in time. You don't necessarily have to be Christian in order to be good or bad. And then finally, manners. I talk about manners here in a second. So the medieval mindset is all about renunciation and contemplation. I like big words. Renunciation reminds me of renounce. What does that mean? Disown, I like that. Or reject, exactly. So you're rejecting or disowning the here and now world, the living in the here and now. Bye-bye, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to think about the here and now too much. I want to think about what's coming. I want to think about how to get into heaven and being in heaven and that sort of thing. Renunciation, renouncing the world as terribly evil and not even existing in it and waiting for the next world was the medieval mindset. Now they want people to live in the here and now. Contemplating God, contemplating the goodness of God, contemplating the evils of sin, and trying to avoid sin. That was all medieval too. These things are out. Renunciation is out. Contemplation is out. Now, this is crazy. Self-confident individuals are what's in. People thinking about themselves instead of thinking about God. People who want to enjoy the wealth that's being accumulated through trade, or you read about the Black Plague, and one of the wonderful things about the Black Plague. I'm really worried about actually recording these, and then people can play back the crazy things that I say in The wonderful thing about the Black Plague is that people survived and other people died, and the people who survived inherited all of the wealth of the people who died. So everybody who survived got richer. They had more wealth. A third of the people died. People are getting their wealth. I'm not really good at math, but I'm just saying they were a third more wealthy. So enjoy that wealth you accumulated. You know, in the medieval period, or for very serious devotees of Jesus, wealth is evil. If you have too much wealth, you have, stored up treasures here. You should be storing up your treasures in heaven instead by doing good stuff. Give away all of your wealth.
To the church,
Well, yeah, okay, that happens. But, never mind. So, people start to enjoy their wealth rather than allegedly giving it away. And it's sort of an ideal, right? Show your skills and show your power and become famous. Doesn't that sound really normal to you? Yeah. But if you think about it from the medieval mindset, it seems so sinful and evil. Because let's say you are really good at painting in the medieval period. You don't sign your work because you believe that the reason that you're such a good painter is not your talent. Why are you such a good painter? God gave it to you. If you sign your work and claim to be such a great, talented individual, you are insulting God. Well, and guess what happens when you insult God? You go to hell. So everybody wants to avoid that. Nobody signs their work in the medieval period. They're going to start to sign their work now. They're going to become famous. This exists throughout a very small segment of the population in towns, first on the Italian peninsula and then spreading to other places. The idea of a Renaissance mentality of becoming famous. And showing off your skills, showing off your power. I call it Kardashianism. Except, because obviously Kardashians want to become famous, and they did become famous, right? But you know what the problem is with Kardashianism? They certainly are self-confident. They don't have any skills. Okay. Sort of. They are incredibly wealthy and stuff, so they have some sort of skills, but not the classical skills of the Greeks and the Romans, I would say. I'm going to go through a few people that you should be acquainted with and just sort of try to prove to you. I'm trying to get you evidence that what I'm telling you is true. I'm engaging in rhetoric still. So there's this guy named Francesco Petrarch. He's so cool, we just call him Petrarch. He's like Madonna. You're so cool. Lady Gaga, that's 2 words, but you get what I mean. You don't need like a first name and a last name. He is known as the father of humanism. He is the first humanist. He's the first person who is dealing with the things that I described to you. And what he does is, and it seems a little bit odd, but he writes to and about deceased Romans. He luckily doesn't expect an answer from them, but he's writing about them. He writes, for example, letters to the ancient dead, in which he's writing these famous Romans and basically telling them how great he thinks they are, so that other people will realize how great the Romans were. And eventually he's going to popularize this idea of being great yourself at this period of time. He writes a book called Africa, about Scipio Africanus, once again, somebody from the Punic Wars who makes their mark by being a successful general. He writes a book. I love the title of books when they actually tell you what the heck it's all about. The Lives of Illustrious Men. Illustrious meaning, yes, but also cool. Yes, the lives of cool and great men. And he writes love sonnets to a woman he saw at church one day. He falls in love with her. She's already married. Ouch, that hurts. They can't be together. And so he writes all these love sonnets to this woman who is unobtainable. That was a sign. Once again, in the medieval period, nobody cares about your love life. Nobody cares about your heartbreak. Nobody cares about your unobtainable love, because it should be all about God. But now, people start to care about that stuff, just like the Romans cared about it and the Greeks cared about it. He also helped to create modern Italian with his Florentine dialect. That's just sort of interesting info. There's also a guy by the name of Giovanni Boccaccio who writes a book called the Decameron. And it's a really amusing book about people. It's about 10 people. Each one of them, they're all hanging out together, and they're all telling each other stories. 10 people tell 10 stories about their lives, or about people that they know, or just about regular people. Sort of regular semi-elite people. They're not writing about, serfs or peasants. They're writing about people who live in the towns who are very wealthy and have the wherewithal to flee the plague together. But here's the thing about this, and you and I would probably read this, and we actually will have a chance to read excerpts from it. And it's really pretty funny. There's some funny stories, and there's some sad stories, and so on. But here's why this is so Renaissance. It's regular people. It's not saints. It's not angels. It's not God. It's regular people doing regular things. And you and I think regular people doing regular things, that's interesting to us. Because guess what we are? Regular people. Except for one of us in class who's actually an angel. We are. Well done with the hiding of the wings. Regular people doing regular things. Nobody would have cared about that in the medieval period. Now with the Renaissance, people care about that. There's also a guy by the name of Pico della Mirandola. It's a fun name to say. Pico della Mirandola. I want you to say it too. Doesn't it just flow from the tongue? It seems like you know Italian when you can say Pico della Mirandola. First start with buongiorno, and then Pico della Mirandola. And then people just look at you quizzically. He writes a book, or not a book, he has an oration. He has a speech. And then it gets written down. Of course, it's the oration on the dignity of man. Once again, a title. That is a wonderful title. Man has worth. Man has dignity. Man is something special. Man can be whatever he wants to be.
Pardon the interruption again. 11th graders with the last names that start with F through K who have not yet had their student photo taken, please go to the comments and enter FIC for their picture makeup. Thank you.
This is really kind of interesting because he says that man can soar with the angels, to speak of angels, can be like an angel, can be so very intelligent and rational and moral and all these other kinds of things, like he believes he is and other people who believe in the Renaissance are. But then man can also wallow with the swine, wallow with the pigs, be really quite animal-like. I think he's talking probably about the peasants outside of the cities. Because truly, they're barely better than animals oftentimes, for the people, the elite people in the cities. And he says that man is really quite special because man has the ability to reason. Man can use mathematics, perhaps to uncover the secrets of the universe. And man has morality. Man can decide, with the help of Christianity perhaps, what is good and what is evil. And animals don't do that. Animals don't do math. And animals don't seem to have the same morality. You know what I mean? Like when my poodle steals my toast in the morning, he doesn't feel bad. He's just hungry. He's just doing his thing. So, math and morality makes man special. Man's always no, 1494 doesn't really tell me anything. If it was like 1348, I'd say right. Usually people who are elite live longer. It's sad that he passed away so young. He could have done great things. He could have soared with the angels. But, do you want me to make something up? Sure. Diphtheria. Look it up. Here's what I really like to talk about, manners. Manners are a very interesting subject, I think. Baldassare Castiglione writes a book called The Book of the Courtier. This is fairly late for the Renaissance, actually, 1528. But this book, The Book of the Courtier, becomes one of the most famous books for a really long period of time in Europe. The Book of the Courtier is a kind of dialogue or discussion between people, once again, it's kind of like the Decameron, people talking. And these people are talking about what makes a good courtier. A courtier resides at a court. And when you think of courts back in the day, I think of, maybe you think of a king right away, right? But that's not really the kind of court that they're talking about generally. They're talking about a noble's court of some kind. It's kind of like the wealthy, powerful families that run these Italian city-states. That's the kind of court that they're talking about. So what makes a good courtier? A person who hangs around with the people who run a town. Men, women, and so on. What makes a good courtier? He says that the perfect courtier, or really the perfect Renaissance man, is able to nonchalantly do anything and everything. They're just multi-talents. They do everything, and they make it look effortless. That's the perfect courtier. You name anything that somebody from this period of time is doing, and then they do it really well, and it looks effortless. That's what you got going on. So, dancing, composing a poem, fighting with swords, fighting in battle, leading troops, athletic competitions, playing musical instruments. You name it, you can do it, and it doesn't look hard. It's supposed to look really, really easy. There's this term called sprezzatura, which means just that. Doing stuff that's really hard, but you make it look effortless. You make it look easy. So that's what the perfect courtier should do. This is about how to get ahead in courtly society. By doing those things, you're able to get ahead. You're able to be the perfect courtier, and manners are a part of that. There's hundreds of books on manners. If you ask Baldassare Castiglione what the end-all, be-all to life is, he might tell you it's to be the perfect courtier. What would 99 people out of 100 tell you at this point in time? God, getting in heaven. So, completely different sort of thing. He's a Renaissance man. He allegedly was able to stand next to a horse with his feet together and leap over the horse. Wow! Right? Holy cow! And make it look effortless. That just might have been a story, but maybe it's a very small horse as well. But, he is supposed to be a very small pony. Manners are, if you think about this, my mother just drilled manners into my head. You get your elbows off the table. What does that matter? Or, don't burp, and snot rockets are bad, and all these sorts of things, Manners are, if you think about this, they're created by a group of people, an elite group of people, in order to lock out everybody else who doesn't know that code of conduct. Does that make sense to you? They're all just made up. In some societies, burping during a meal is great, and in others, it's completely forbidden. And elbows on the table or not, it just doesn't matter. But you have to know that in order to be part of the elite. See how the Renaissance is about an elite, and these elite people doing something different and locking everybody else out. Niccolò Machiavelli, you probably heard of. He wrote a book called The Prince. And it's a very interesting and short book about how to stay in power with amoral, without moral political calculations. Forever people are going to claim that they are in power because God wants them to be in power, and they're going to say that they are there ruling on the earth for God, or like God would want them to.
Wasn't he not Christian?
I think everybody at this point in time is mostly Christian. There's some Jewish people in Europe as well. There's some Muslim people in Europe as well. But for the most part, a Christian. But what that means can vary quite widely. He is not telling people how to rule in a Christian way. He's telling people how to actually just stay in power. The end justifies the means. Period. So you might have to, hold your enemy's kids captive to make sure that they behave. Or you might have to poison somebody. That happens too. He's just talking about how people who are ruling these city-states at this point in time are actually acting. People are assassinating each other, they're poisoning each other, they are holding people for, as hostages to get one thing or another out of people. And so he's just reporting how it really is. But it's shocking, I think, to people because it's about the here and now, and it's completely divorced from religion. And it's about being talented and successful as a ruler. What he would really like to see is for the Italian city-states to come together in an Italy or an Italian kingdom under an Italian prince who would lead all of the Italians together to have a kind of early nationalism and be able to fight off these foreign invaders who are, at this point in time, invading the Italian peninsula. We'll talk about that in just a second. All of the guys that we'll talk about, you don't need to write all these guys down. We'll cover them later. But all of these guys, Vasco da Gama, Columbus, Magellan, Cortez, Pizarro, these guys are either Renaissance explorers or conquistadors. And each and every one of them, I think, is a perfect example of a Renaissance man. So gutsy to sail across the world, or so gutsy to topple an empire and try to force people to be like they want them to be. These are leaders, these are explorers, these are gutsy Renaissance men. Just as an aside, like I said, we'll talk about them in the next unit. There are some women in the Renaissance as well. There was a woman named Christine de Pizan who is really quite early, if you want to look at her dates, 1363 to 1434. She is a poet. She is an author. She writes books. I think she wrote a book about military science or how to win battles, which seems really kind of unusual, kind of odd for a female at this point in time. She also writes a book called The Treasure of the City of Ladies, and it seems to be a feminist work. She is praising women for their capabilities, and in a way she's kind of telling women how to be. It's like the courtier for women in a way. And it's really quite clever. She tells women how to handle their husbands. I believe you get to read an excerpt of that in your textbook when you do that reading on that. It's really pretty funny. It seems like men are oafs, men are dumb and always getting into trouble, and women are sort of behind the scenes, keeping them from doing too many dumb things. Isabel d'Este is a Renaissance woman. Her husband goes off, he's a ruler of Mantua. He goes off to fight in a war, and she takes over for him, and everybody says, when she takes over, and she's ruling Mantua, oh my gosh, she's doing a better job than her husband does. And that shouldn't surprise us. It does surprise people from the day. But once again, it shows you that while this is the rebirth of individual man, there are some chances for individual women to make their mark as well. Isabel d'Este becomes a patron of artists. That's what famous, rich, powerful people do. They pay artists to create art about them, usually, or about their rule, and so on. Just like the Romans and the Greeks did. Speaking of art, there is a guy by the name of Giorgio Vasari, who is both a painter and an architect. And he writes a book, which I love the title of once again. It's called The Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects. He writes this in 1550. He gives us a whole list of all of the great artists from the Renaissance and says what works of art they created. It's just that. It's a list of talented, influential people. And artists are not just craftsmen anymore, working together to create a statue or working together to create a painting. They start to become superstar artists. People have to have a Michelangelo, or they have to have a Donatello, or they have to have a Raphael painting. These people are sought after, and money is thrown at them in order to create art for people. The church is buying art. Wealthy people are buying art. It's a rebirth of art, once again. And once again, we'll look at art, and we'll talk about art at some point in time. Guess who ends up in the lives of the most excellent painters, sculptors, and architects, besides all the people you've ever heard of? This guy! Vasari himself, he writes himself into the book. How self-centered is that? And how wonderful is that? It's perfectly Renaissance, I think. All right, I don't have too much time left. I've got about 5 minutes if I'm not mistaken. We're going to skip the art bit right now because I'm going to give you a whole day on art. So we're not going to write any of this stuff. Friends at home, you don't have to do that. We'll just look at that when we look at it. That'll save me a few minutes. You should know that there are 5 important city-states, larger city-states, powerful city-states. I think I maybe talk about 2 of them here if I have a chance. But it's Florence, the birthplace of the Renaissance. Venice, a trading empire. The Papal States, where the Pope lives, and where the Pope is the business of the Papal States. In other words, Rome plus a bunch of territory. The Kingdom of Naples and Sicily down here. I'll always sort of talk badly about Naples and Sicily. Sorry if you like Naples and Sicily. It's kind of a backwater. And then Milan, up by France, which is kind of more of an aggressive place. You will read about those places in the book, so I'm not particularly concerned about talking too much about them, I think. In fact, I'm going to, I think maybe I'll tell you about Florence and then try to end things. Florence is the birthplace of the Renaissance. It's controlled by a family, the Medici family. They provide 2 popes and a queen of France. That's not bad. The city itself has a lot of wealth based on textiles and also on banking. The Medici family is a banking family. A really interesting thing that happens, and I'll probably just have to maybe end with this today. There is a guy, a preacher, who comes to Florence and he predicts that the Medici family will be thrown out of power, and sure enough, that happens.
12th graders use their 11th grade photos for their student ID and typically submit a senior photo for the yearbook. Therefore, a student photo is not required. However, 12th graders with the last names that start with A through E who do not have a photo from last year for their student ID, please go to the comments and enter pick for picture makeup.
This guy, Girolamo Savonarola, predicts the demise of the Medici, and he's right. And he becomes the dictator, in a way, of Florence for a short period of time. This is not how old he was. He's a 3-year-old toddler who took over Florence. No, but this is the period of time that he's in Florence, and what he's doing is the reverse of the Renaissance. He says to the people who have been living in this new way, you're sinning. You're doing wrong. You need to stop. You're going to go to hell. And he becomes very popular for a short period of time. He says, create bonfires. Bring all of the things that are causing you to sin and burn them publicly. Brushes and artwork and fancy dresses and all these sorts of things. People are super into it for a short period of time. People forget the Renaissance, and then they realize this old way of living is not good. You're not enjoying your world. It's boring. It's being afraid of going to hell all the time. And so eventually he criticizes the Pope for being corrupt, and the Pope has him arrested and killed. Period. The Pope is not into religion either. The Pope is into living in the Renaissance way. I'm going to finish today with the Italian Wars. There is a period of time up until about 1494, from like 1454 to 1494, where no wars are happening really on the Italian peninsula, and then a war breaks out. The French monarchy, the French kingdom, invades the Italian peninsula, and all the city-states join with or against the French, and then there's just chaotic war for a period of 60 years or so, 70 years. The German troops come in, Spanish troops come in. The German king and Spanish king is the same guy. He's bringing his troops in and fighting the French. The emperor at this point, the German emperor, a guy we call Charles V, his troops invade Rome and sack the city. They steal stuff. They kill people. They kind of lay waste to the capital of Christendom. It seems like the end of time. And with all of this stuff going on, the Italian War is happening, it really prevents the Renaissance from continuing, and the Renaissance kind of dies out in Italy at this point in time. Because people are too busy fighting to create great works of art or to think great thoughts. They can still be, really talented guys at killing each other. But it's hard to do the poetry and do the dancing and do all those other things when you're afraid for your life. When German mercenaries are chasing you through the streets of Rome. So the Italian wars in the Renaissance. Next time I lecture, I'm going to tell you about the Northern Renaissance. It moves north and kind of changes. Tomorrow, I think we will have a reading to do and an assignment to do. Please do that, whether you're at home or while you're in the museum. Stephanie, good? Okay. There's not going to be a lecture tomorrow. Have a great day. I hope everybody was here. Hi at home. Hopefully that went okay for you.